A quick overview of today's schedule. So after introduction, we will move on to our today's talk, Elephants in Europe, Science and Welfare, by Dr. Christian Schiffmann. And we'll move on to a conversation with Heidi Riddle with Dr. Schiffmann. And we'll have a Q&A session with, which is moderated by Sanjay Ajanikar. To give you an introduction about myself, I'm Aishwarya, and I'm a Junior Research Fellow at Center for Wildlife Studies. I'm exploring the wild trails of Western Ghats, and I'm currently working in the southern Nilgiri landscape of the Western Ghats. And I will be hosting today's event and looking forward for a meaningful event and a day for all of you here with us today. Today's talk is going to be on Elephants in Europe, Science and Conservation by Dr. Christian Schiffmann. Dr. Christian Schiffmann studied veterinary medicine at the University of Bern and did his PhD in the University of Zurich. Dr. Schiffmann gained practical experience in elephant management and care at a private facility in Germany. Simultaneously continued research activity on dentition of elephants, their sleeping behavior, musculoskeletal disorders, and stereotypical behavior. He became a member of Elephant Taxon Advisory Group of Elephant Association of Zoos and Aquaria at the beginning of 2020. Dr. Schiffmann became a member of IUCN Asian Elephant Specialist Group in 2022, joined the editorial board of Journal Gaja. So a very warm welcome, Dr. Schiffmann. Over to you.
Hello, so I will share my screen now and we'll start right away with the PowerPoint, right? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Christian.
Okay, we'll try again. Share my screen.
Sure.
Okay, he says I cannot share my screen with you because you have blocked it.
Aishwarya and Kushal, will you please look into it?
Okay,
Yes,
I will
Sanjay.
try.
Yeah,
I
I've
will
made
try
it the
again.
co-host. Hopefully, he will be able to share now.
screen now?
Yes. Yes, Dr.
Okay, can you see my screen? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, Dr. Christian, we can hear you as well as we can see your screen also.
You can see my screen, so I can start,
Yes.
right?
Please do.
Okay.
Yes.
So the title of my talk today is Elephants in Europe, Science and Welfare. And I'm quite sure at the end of the talk, you will understand this slide here with the two pictures, one of the lying elephant on the right and one of the survivorship curves. So what are my goals for this talk today? So my first goal is to provide you insights into elephant management and care in Europe. Then to present some research outputs of this ex-situ population, to introduce a new concept of zoo elephant and in general, zoo animal welfare, and in doing so, to offer subjects for the discussion following this talk. The current population size in Europe are around 300 Asian elephants and 200 African elephants. Most of the zoos keeping elephants are members of the European Association of Zoos and Aquaria called IAZA. And this means these elephants are managed in an endangered European species program, which means there is the target to keep a self-sustainable and genetically healthy population in captivity. To do so, in 2020, a best practice guideline has been published by IAZA, and this is quite a comparative document which can be downloaded by everybody, so it's free accessible under the link indicated here. When we look at elephant management and care in Europe, there has been quite heavy changes during the past few decades. And that's why I try to provide you now insights on the one hand side to the old days, indicated with this picture on the left, and the other hand on the way how we keep elephants today, or partially how they should be kept today in our view. So I will use this icon with the elephant in black and white on the left to show, to indicate this is the old day situation, and these pictures with the elephants on a huge savanna exhibit as an indicator for what is meant to be up to date today. We will have a look at the indoor enclosures. We will have a look at the outdoor enclosures. I will talk about management, about medical care, and about diet. And all of these aspects, we'll have a look at them in the view how they have been done in the past and how they should or they are done today. So let's start right away. Here, this is the way an indoor enclosure looked in the past. You see quite a small concrete surface where the elephants are standing, a ditch here, and here you've got the opportunities to put the elephants on chain. In earlier days, it was common to keep the elephants chained up during the night. So for the times back then, this was just normal standard. Another example for the old days. This is the platforms the elephants spent their nights on, and during winter time, even all days. So in the temperature and the climate we have here, the elephants cannot spend all day long outside usually. And so it was common practice to keep them up in the barn or in the indoor enclosure for the night, which here you can see is quite a small space. Here another example for the old days. You can see there are some ropes at the ditch to prevent the elephants from falling into the ditch, because there have been some accidents, and the persons in charge learned from these accidents and said, let's put ropes here to prevent the elephants from falling down. Another example for the old days, again, really small platform here, concrete flooring and some ropes to prevent or to additionally fence the elephants. Now let's switch to what is standard nowadays. Nowadays, we wish to have indoor enclosures with much light in it through these transparent roofs, with a sand substrate, the flooring, and with a lot of enrichment, and of course, much more space than you have seen in the examples before. This can also look like this. And here you can see again light through the roof, soft substrates, and a lot of stuff to play and to interact with. Another example for an enclosure of nowadays. It can also look like this, where we have, again, a lot of light, quite similar to the canopy in the rainforest, and we've got a lot of soft substrate and quite a way to roam there. So what about the outdoor enclosures? And again, in earlier days, this was standard. The elephant has quite a small space, again, a ditch to prevent him from leaving the space, and not much more to do. Quite a lot of concrete walls. Here another example, and you can see it's the same pattern. You've got the elephant standing on the platform, you've got the ditch here, and there's not that much to do there. Here another example, again, a lot of concrete and quite small space. How do the outdoor enclosures look nowadays? This is an example of it. And you can see far more space. The enclosure goes up to this gate, up to there, and again, natural soft substrates. Another example for nowadays, and you can see there are not these concrete ditches only, but there's a lot of structures to interact with, and again, much more space. Here as well, some shade, and this exhibit as well, really spacious, and a lot of opportunities for the elephant to roam. Here as well, natural substrates, natural trees providing shade, and so on. Might also look like that. You've got the water sources, you've got some artificial rocks, and the elephants can walk around, go out of sight of each other, and do whatever they like. So let's go to the next point regarding the management. And there are two aspects I wish to focus on. First, the social management. In earlier days, most of the elephants living in Europe were unrelated individuals, which means, as an example here, you've got 3 African females unrelated, so they've got nothing to do with each other. And if you look how they are standing here, it looks like everybody's standing and wondering what it should do today. So there's just the enclosure, not that big, and elephants with nothing to do. Or here, 2 unrelated females of a certain age, nothing's going on. Of course, here a bit of snow, but that's all. Or here, a female living his life alone. Also, the males were usually kept alone. Nowadays, we have turned it into a better. Most of the females are living in grown family groups, in matrilineal groups, where they can live with their mother, with their sisters, with their daughter, whatever. And if feasible, even the males here on the right can walk with the family group and interact with the females, with the calves, and spend time together. And there are also facilities keeping all male groups, which means that the juvenile males have the opportunity to learn and to interact with the adult males, which is very important regarding their behavior in a social context. The second aspect I wish to focus on is the interaction between human, which means elephant keepers, and the elephants. So in the older days, it was common practice to keep the elephants in direct contact, or also called free contact, which means traditionally the keeper shares the space with the elephant and the elephant is dominated by the keeper. On this picture, you can see that's quite part of a show of the elephants. Keeper sitting on the back of the elephant is doing some positioning on this stuff here. So this is quite of circus-like. And in these days, it was also common practice to have a whip with each other if the keepers were with the elephant. And here the keeper tries to ride it. In this management system, it's possible to walk the elephants. You can see here the ball hooks the keepers carry with them, and they can walk the elephants on the zoo ground. Again, a bit of circus-like behaviors which have been trained. Nowadays, this management option is phasing out, and IASA strongly recommends to go for protected contact until 2030. And protected contact means that the keeper and the elephant do not share unrestricted space. There's always a protective barrier in between them. So this means interaction going on between the keeper and the elephant is always based on positive reinforcement. If the elephant is not willing to come, he will not come. He's free to choose, and all the training which is done is based on positive reinforcement. Here another example where you can see the elephant standing on one side of the barrier and the keeper on the other one. It can also look like this. You can see a washing routine of an adult male, the keepers on this side of the barrier, the elephant on the other one. Regarding medical care, in earlier days, it was common that we had such situations. You can see here heavily overgrown toenails, also in the digital spaces. An even worse example here with heavily overgrown nails in the hind legs of this African female. Or here, an Asian female with several abscesses of severe grade in her front legs on both sides. Or here, an abscess of the nail 5 on the left front foot. And we have to admit, we have not get rid of this at all today. So even today, we know that the elephant foot is one of the structures most important to the elephant because it's standing on its feet, and we have to take care regarding the veterinarian part to keep the feet in a good condition. But until now, and compared to the earlier days, we have learned a lot about that. We know far more about the anatomy, the physiology, and how we may support, prevent, and if needed, treat problems in the elephant's foot. And also foot care can be done perfectly in a protected context. So also for such procedures, it is possible to train the elephants as it is done here and to work with them even without dominating them and without needing the whip or whatever to force them to participate. And if we get there, we can be sure that we have nicely trimmed and feet in a good shape. Another aspect of medical care that we learned of is the mouth inspection regarding the molars. So the molars is the structures the elephants need to chew on. So as you can imagine, it is vital for the elephant to have good molars and to be able to properly chew its diet. So it means one part of medical training is as well the mouth inspection to check and to monitor how the molars develop. As an example, you can see here, molar 5 is failing out, molar 6 here in place. So here's the gap in between. And you wish to know how this older female is chewing and how it gets his diet done and digested. And if we think about the Asian elephant calves, especially, one concern is still EHV, so herpes and the hemorrhagic disease. And in order to monitor them regarding their health, there is also a lot of training done with the calves putting in such crates where they can enter by their free choice. So they have always the opportunity to go back to their mom, and the keepers are able to monitor their tongue. And as you can see on the next slide, also their temperature inside their mouth in order to be alert if there should be an EHV infection going on. So this is a critical part of preventative medical care nowadays in European zoo elephants. So let's come to the last point, which is called the diet. In earlier days, feeding elephants in European zoos very often looked like this. So you can see a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits and bread, and everything was thrown on the exhibit and the elephant could eat. And as you can see already here, this led to obesity, of course. Another example for this, a wheelbarrow full of melons, so a lot of sugar in it for this elephant. And you all will know that elephants are mega herbivores, so this means their digestive tract is made up to digest fiber stuff, which is poor in energy. So really not what we are giving them here. So regarding the diet, we learned a lot that the nutritionists say it's very clear the elephants need hay, straw, browse, branches, and bark, and so on. And not the fruits, not the vegetables, but the green stuff. And that's why nowadays, feeding elephants looks rather like that. And as you can see with this hay net, also on the next page, with this, we try to activate the elephants. The elephants in the wild, they are foraging a lot of hours a day. And in the zoo or in the captive conditions, we try to mimic that and try to provide them opportunities to express this natural foraging behavior, even under the circumstances of our facilities. So it can look like this. If you have these top feeders and the elephant can work on them to get its food. Here, another nice example of a top feeder with a hay net. And you can see also the social thing here. We've got a family group and the adult male, all spending time together and working for their food. So the question now is, why have all these changes occurred? I mean, it would be really nice to say, well, the zoos were so critical to themselves and they said, well, we have to become better. And what we did in the old days was probably not the best way. But to be honest, this was not the case. At the beginning of the century, there was a report done by these persons here, and it was quite heavily what they found when they reviewed the welfare of zoo elephants in Europe. Some years later, they published this paper in Science where they said that the survivorship in zoo elephants is compromised, which is a strong argument against keeping elephants in zoos, to be honest. And in their report, they said, well, many elephants in European zoos are overweight or even obese. They said a lot of them show stereotypical behavior, which might indicate negative welfare. And they said the foot health in many of the individuals is poor. So there was definitely time to change for the zoos regarding their elephant management and care. And that's what they did. In Europe, there has been quite a body of research on body condition scoring and body weight development. In order to be aware of that, and to bring the elephants away from overweight, from obesity, into a more natural state of physical condition. Several papers have shown that it is feasible to reduce stereotypical behavior or to even get rid of it by new enclosures, more enrichment, and more natural conditions. And also regarding foot care, there have been population-wide research on the foot health in Asian elephants, which was an opportunity to determine the risk factors for foot pathologies and how they might best be treated or even prevented, which would be the best way to deal with them. So in comparison to the times of this report, we can say there's been a lot of improvement since then. But what about the survivorship? I mean, are we really doing it so bad here that the elephants don't get that old as they would do in the wild? And there has been a publication only a few months ago of a group where they analyzed the survivorship curves of elephants in Europe and as well in North American zoos and tried to compare them to the days before and also to some free-ranging populations where data were available. And what we can see there, here for the African elephants, if you look at the data and put them in cohorts of some decades, we can see that between the decades up to nowadays, we continuously improved. So the survivorship curves go to the right. We're becoming better in the African species. If you look at the same in the Asian, we can see a similar pictures. We're getting better, but the difference is not that much as it was in the African, which means in the Asian elephant, we already started at a quite good level, but even though we improved up to nowadays, and it will be very interesting to see how the next curve will develop. Just a few words regarding the comparison with free-ranging or semi-captive populations. It is very difficult to do a reliable comparison with data from India or from working camps in Myanmar, because the data which have been published are always only snapshots of one moment of time. So if I do the comparison with other populations, it needs to be defined from when, in which situation was this population back then. If you look again at the Africans, we've got this curve from Addo Elephant National Park, where we have to say, well, it's incredible. You've got nearly 90% of elephants alive up to their 60s. So this might not be the natural situation and might not remain stable for many years. So that's why always be careful with which population and in which status this population is before you do comparisons. And I wish to give you a further example. A few years ago, we observed in several zoo elephants this. You can see here an elephant standing, 10 o'clock in the evening. He seems to be quiet, probably a bit drowsy, trunk is hanging down, he's standing still, and then suddenly the elephant falls down. Just out of a standing position, the elephant falls down to the ground and he remains on the ground. This was not only one case where we observed this, we've seen this in several zoo elephants, probably 5 or 6 cases I am aware of. And we try to figure out, why is this the case? Why do the elephants just out of a standing position fall down? And they seem to be drowsy. So they seem to be drowsy in a standing position. Well, I don't know what about you, but when I was a child, my books told me, well, elephants, if they sleep, they do this in a standing position. So they told me, elephants, they can sleep while standing. If we check the literature, there's only one report on the quantity of lying rests in free-ranging African elephants so far, and none for the Asian species. So we cannot know from the literature available how long do Asian elephants spend sleeping in a lying position a day. How many hours? And the reason for that is probably that it's very hard to get them observed. And I'm sure in this point you will know this much better than me, because you have more experience in the research in the field. As far as I understand, it's very difficult to observe the elephant regarding sleeping behavior in a lying position in this environment. In the zoo setting, we have much clearer view. We can see our elephants and we can observe their sleeping behavior. And that's what we did during the past years here in Europe. We learned a lot about the sleeping behavior of our elephants. And we had to admit that it was partially, at least, due to our management system that we didn't provide them sufficient amount of satisfactory rest. So this means we had drowsy elephants because they didn't find any opportunity to have comfortable and satisfying lying rest. And it's quite easy to imagine this if you look at that. You have a concrete flooring, and where should the elephant lay down here? Where is here nice ground to lay on if you weigh 4 or 5 tons, whatever? So that's why many facilities have changed their grounds to a soft substrate, which allows the elephant to find a comfortable position there. Again, here, you remember that. Sandy substrate, and if we get there, the elephants will have their lying rest of around 4 hours each night, and they have a comfortable lying rest. And you can find these nice traces in the substrate in the morning. Okay, these are some examples. Now, just for the last few minutes, I wish to introduce a quite new concept of zoo elephant, or in general, zoo animal welfare. This has been published very recently in the Standard Book of Zoo Animal Medicine, and you can see it's all based on this graph. So you have here the welfare. On the left, you've got a meaningless life in anxiety-prone environment, which we may also call bad husbandry. Then we've got the meaningless lives and meaningful lives, and here meaningful lives, and anxiety-free, and anxiety-prone environments. So if you look at this for the elephants, here, extreme captivity, bad husbandry, meaningless life in an anxiety-prone environment. This might be also meaningless lives, but anxiety-free. There's plenty of food and no danger to be afraid of. What about the natural habitat? If you look at this, I mean, you will be aware of such pictures from Sri Lanka. So these elephants, they will be afraid of dying due to their starvation. They will be afraid of not finding enough food or water. And if they don't find, they will die. So yes, meaningful life because they have to take meaningful decisions, but in an anxiety-prone environment. Also here, these males fight each other. The one who will lose, he may die, probably. So again, anxiety-prone environment, but meaningful lives. And what if we would be able to provide the elephants meaningful lives in an anxiety-free environment? These might be where the welfare is at max. And we wish to call this good husbandry. So this means we should not only provide the elephants with everything they need, but we should also provide them a meaningful life. And if we can get there, we assume that we provide them the maximum welfare they can get. And we wish to call this good husbandry nowadays. So to give you an example, if you have this juvenile male here, what does he need to have this maximum welfare? Well, he needs the diet, an appropriate diet, so appropriate for his specific digestive tract, and this diet should be provided to him in a way that it's of relevance. It makes a difference. If he gets there, if he solves the problem which is given to him, and if he can be active to get his food. He needs medical care to be helped, And all this should be done with positive reinforcement training, so not to force or dominate them. He needs social partners to interact with, and he needs all the natural substrates to interact with and to keep his physical system healthy and mobile. And of course, he needs cognitive input to also from his cognition to have the input there and to be active with his brain. And if we can tick all these points, we may say, okay, we provide our elephant a good husbandry and the best possible welfare. So let me give you only a few future perspectives. At the moment, there's research going on regarding the molars of the elephants and the grinding surface regarding the chewing efficacy of the elephants. There's a research going on in Europe on the sleeping behavior, using also deep learning methods to learn more about the elephants and to monitor their sleeping behavior on a daily basis. There's research going on the emotional state of elephants, of African elephants, and regarding the question if they are able to feel empathy. There's another study going on focusing on social learning of Asian elephants. And one of my favorite ones, there's research going on the genetic basis of the subspecies of the Asian elephant, which is quite important in my view, and which might extend or confirm what we think today about the subspecies, or if we should rethink that. So let me finish with that. On this picture, you can see several aspects of modern elephant management and care in Europe. You can see two males interacting together nicely. You can see a soft substrate. And of course, it is of meaning for both elephants to be there and to interact with each other. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schiffmann, for that very insightful presentation with a lot of examples and photographs. To move on to our next session, we have a conversation with Dr. Heidi, Miss Heidi Riddle. Good husbandry or an elephant in the room. Ms. Heidi Riddle has over 40 years of experience in working with wildlife management and conservation. For more than 2 decades, Heidi's efforts have also focused on elephant conservation projects throughout South and Southeast Asia across different levels of government, as well as non-governmental partners, as advisors and coordinators to various wildlife conservation organizations. Heidi leverages her deep expertise in elephant care and management to develop long-term program to enhance the capacity of local field staff to conduct direct wildlife conservation activities. Since 1999, Heidi has been an invited member of Asian Elephant Specialist Group, and currently she serves as a vital chair of the group. Over to you, Ms. Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. So thank you, Dr. Schiffmann, for that presentation. To kind of start the discussion, one of the things that I wanted to throw out, since I was kind of asked to lead a conversation with you based on what you were going to present about zoo elephant welfare and management. Although you do show how there's been a lot of progress in the welfare of zoo elephants in Europe, what do you say to people that say that's still not enough, that in effect, elephants don't belong in zoos, especially not in zoos that far out of their range. And therefore, you know, should we continue to have elephants in zoos, or is that something that should be phased out?
This is definitely an important question, and I'm convinced that we have to face this. And not only regarding elephants, but any zoo animal, I feel that the concept I've just tried to introduce in a few words gives a good basis for that. Because if we are able to prove that we can provide to an animal, independent of the species, a better welfare than it might have in the wild, we don't need to justify this. We can say, well, we provide them the best possible welfare here in our care, so there's no need to compare this afterwards to the wild. And I've got a feeling that very often people think that living in the wild is freedom. They don't think about starvation. They don't think about natural borders the animals have in the wild. And I think it is important to teach this and to show the people also, if you're living in the wild, this might be a meaningful life, but also full of fear.
Right, and that's true, but at the same time, is that justification enough? Because what does an elephant in a zoo contribute to conservation if we wind up with the only elephants left are the ones that are in zoos? Have we truly, you know, done good conservation of the species if that is kind of, you know, the long-term, the end effect? So how do you reconcile trying to explain that, you know, the wild is one situation, elephants in zoos is a different situation, instead of trying to justify the fact that, well, elephants are in zoos because there are problems in the wild. So I guess what I'm trying to say is how do you kind of counter that type of criticism?
I mean, there's no doubt that for each zoos there's the task to do the information about the situation in the wild and to explain to the people where are the problems in the wild, of course. And we should make use of the animals living here as ambassadors for their species. No need to discuss about that. I think that's more than just basic nowadays. Each zoo should go for that, do the educational stuff and all this. But we can only do this if we are sure that we provide the best possible care for the elephants in our hands. And if we do that, then of course we need to talk about conservation, all this stuff, because people will not get aware of that if they don't see the animals here and can understand how important it is to care for them in the wild as well.
Yes, now that's also an argument that's been used for many, many years, is that, you know, not just elephants, but any species, we have them in zoos because they're ambassadors for their species. What I'm trying to kind of, you know, explore more is how do you see the conservation value beyond just that statement? Well, they're ambassadors for their species. Well, how do elephants in zoos, whether it's in Europe or anywhere else outside the range, how do they truly contribute to conservation of their species? And how can we improve that particular component? Because the welfare aspect obviously has been improved over the years, but what about that link to conservation and how the zoo elephants, you know, have more of a conservation value? Because if you look at some of the studies that are going on, you know, as you're listing them out, I'm thinking, okay, but how does that help the conservation of the species? What those studies help for the most part are how to improve welfare and management in a zoo species, in a zoo animal, in this case, elephants. But how does that then tie into helping conservation of the species in its native range?
Okay, there are two aspects I wish to mention here. One is, if we think about the zoo population as one backup population for the wild in case of reintroductions, then the research I mentioned in one of the last slides regarding the genetic basis of the subspecies, especially in the Asian elephant, this might become relevant. So that's the point where we try to learn at the moment. Should we breed the elephants under our care due to their subspecies standard in order to have later on an opportunity for reintroductions. But at the moment, I cannot tell you if there's a reliable option or not, or if it's realistic to get there once regarding their genetic basis. But that's where the studies are going on at the moment. And the other thing, in my view, there are several options to bring what we learned here in the ex situ population, to bring them to a benefit for the in situ conservation as well. If you look at the foot care as an example, a lot that we learn about how to treat feet might also be used for specialists working in the field with elephants. And also if they have injuries or whatever and are caught due to that, there we might change or exchange what we learned, even what we learned here or what they learned in the field. And so I think this might be of a value for conservation strategies nowadays as well.
Okay, but the argument about keeping species in zoos so that they can be introduced later potentially, for a species like elephants, obviously then the most important thing is habitat protection, which happens, and habitat loss and degradation happens to be the #1 problem for elephants, both in Africa and Asia. And so I guess it's kind of, to me, it's a little bit, you know, putting a whole lot of resources into trying to have these animals that may or may not be able to be introduced into the wild in 20, 30 years. In the meantime, we might lose the opportunities to actually protect habitat. So to play devil's advocate, wouldn't it be better to put those resources into protecting habitat so that there is somewhere to potentially release the animals, you know, that might still be available then?
Probably you're right. I think it's difficult to say here where the money would be best invested regarding that. But as I fully agree that the main problem will be if the habitats may exist or if they're gone. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying a lot to this to you because obviously I've been around zoos for a long time, and I'm hearing the same kind of justifications over and over and over. And while we have made, as a zoological community, great strides in improving management and welfare of elephants kept in zoological facilities, both in Europe and in North America, I think there's still that link to conservation that is still missing, that direct link where how do these animals really help conservation of their species? And it has to go beyond just saying that, well, they're ambassadors for their species and we're keeping them just in case, you know, we need them later to reintroduce them. And while it's great to do genetic work and to figure out, you know, where there's subspecies and where there's not, and how to breed more according to genetics, at the same time, I think the focus on the bigger picture is lost somewhat of, well, the main thing is also protecting habitat, and that shouldn't be lost because that is a big problem. And that's a direct contribution to conflict, which then a lot of animals die due to conflict. And so therefore, you know, are we really focusing the right way? Should we not be, now that we've gotten to a point where we feel that we have improved welfare and management for captive elephants by and large, that now we should really start to focus more on how now can we help conservation, be it in Africa or Asia.
Yes, and I think there are still a lot of opportunities to do so. If you think about EHV, a lot of the mechanisms we understand nowadays about this pathologies, about this disease, which is a devastating one, we know from the situations in captivity. We've learned it here. We saw the calves dying and we did the pathologies and all this stuff. And I think nowadays we have quite a clear picture why this happens. Why do the calves die? What is there going on inside their bodies? And if it goes on with the fragmentation in the wild of the wild population, it's quite realistic that EHV will strike them as well, that there will be more and more cases as well. So probably this might be a direct link where the in situ conservation might benefit from what we've learned during the past years in captivity.
Yes, but I think we shouldn't limit ourselves to looking at it to date, obviously there have been Asian elephants in range countries, wild elephants that have been found to have EHV when they have done postmortems on them. But at the same time, it is not the leading cause of death of wild Asian elephants, EHV, far from it. So it's really not a conservation issue per se. Learning about disease obviously is important, but there's other diseases that are a bigger concern, certainly in the Asian range countries, to wild elephants right now rather than EHV. So I guess that's I try to look at it more and more from the standpoint of how can all of this help conservation? We can't keep focusing on some of these same issues and keep repeating them because maybe we're not really doing right by the species and by conservation of the species if we don't take a step back and say, okay, how far have we come? What have we accomplished? And now how can we take it in a different direction so we have more of a direct impact on conservation itself?
Yes.
Sorry, the light's really bad in here. Okay, do we want to take some questions now, Sanjay?
Yes, absolutely. Hi.
Because I think there's some.
Yes. Before we start the question and answer session, I just needed a confirmation that I am audible enough.
Yes, Sanjay, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. So wonderful. Before we move on, I must say this, and it's really insightful presentation by Dr. Christian. And I must say one thing. It's a compliment to the presentation that in the beginning you introduced very nicely the situation earlier and situation later, and you introduced 2 icons for that. And that was absolutely cool because it's so basic, but it made us totally engaged, So every slide we're looking at, we are looking for that icon reference. It's earlier situation and current situation. So I really liked use of those icons, Dr. Christian. And absolutely insightful presentation. Very complicated concepts, but you simplified it to an extent that everybody could understand it. And I may go ahead and start taking the questions from the audience. So there's the first question from Sai Sanjeev, where she asked, what measures are taken by European Zoo so that Asian elephants can adapt to the colder climate? And either of you can take it, maybe Dr. Christian.
Well, not really sure if I got it right. If I got it right, it's about the temperature and the climate, how the elephants can deal with it here.
Absolutely.
There are no scientific studies on that so far. So what I cannot tell you or give you an answer which is evidence-based. According to my experiences, the Asian species can deal with the climate here in Europe far better than the Africans do. In the Africans, we have very often problems with the joints, with the musculoskeletal system, and I'm quite sure that this has to do with the climate here, which is far colder and more humid than it would have been in Africa.
Perfect, perfect. But any researches that you may have come across when you're looking at the body conditioning, and you also mentioned about the bone and bone-related issue in African Zoo, but what about being it's a colder environment compared to the Asia? How does the adoption works?
How the elephants deal with the cold here?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Usually in the zoos here, it depends on where in Europe they are. But we say if the temperature falls below 5 or 10 degrees, the elephants are not out there for 24 hours. So they can go on the outer enclosures, but after a few hours, they come back inside the enclosure where it's heated indoors. And in doing so, we prevent them from getting cold and from getting injured due to the cold. But we learned also if there are 2 or 3 degrees below zero, they can deal with it for a few hours. But afterwards, they need to have the opportunity to warm up again in the indoor area.
Right.
Can I add something to that?
Please do that.
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Schiffmann that elephants can actually adapt fairly well to cold. I would slightly disagree with him that there's a difference between the African and the Asian, because actually in some parts of their native range in Africa, they do venture up into areas where there is snow at certain parts of the year. So I think that both are equally, able to adapt to cold climates, but one has to be careful that they're not out in very cold temperatures for too long. And one of the issues also that is considered is the fact that because the edges of the ears are very thin, that when the temperatures drop below freezing, that if the elephant is out too long, that the edges of the ears can actually get frostbite. And so that's kind of a real issue that one has to consider. So even if the elephant seems okay, you have to be careful. And because they're a very large animal, if they lose enough body heat, they have to have an area that's warm to come back into, because otherwise it's very difficult for them to warm up once they've lost a considerable amount of their body heat. So surprisingly, they can adapt to cold, but one has to be very careful and, not leave them out there, as Dr. Schiffmann said, not leave them out there 24 hours. So I think we have the same experiences in North America in facilities that are, fairly far north, that elephants can get adjusted to it. And then you have individual elephants. I mean, it's like with people. Some people really don't like cold weather. Some elephants really don't like cold weather, and others are not bothered by it one bit.
Absolutely. Yes. So our next question comes from Sayed from IPB University, and he or she is asking how Asian elephants came in Europe. So we are going back to the historical perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay. Yes, everybody, I'm coming from Indonesia, from Bogor, from IPB University. At the moment, we are working to make monitoring on the wildlife, wild elephant in Jambi, that is central Sumatra. I have a question to Dr. Schiffmann about the Asian elephant that you explained on your presentation. There is any Sumatran elephant? As I understand, there's a difference between the other elephant in the world. But Sumatran elephant is the living in the mountainous area. They can their habitat sometimes in the mountainous and not under the flat area. What I see, and as your presentation, that tip over elephant or fell over elephant is, I think it's very interesting moment. As I understand that the elephant is just usually it's not the failover is very dangerous for this big animal. I can show you just short video that there is usually they can walk up to the steep area, and the elephant can use their butt or their knees to control not fall over. I think this very interesting on this meeting, but we have a lot of elephant in here, either wild elephant or the captive elephant. Okay, that's all. That maybe just for I need more information about the Asian elephant and the Europe. There is any Sumatran elephant there? Thank you.
Okay, not quite sure if I got it right, but yes, in the European population, there are a few individuals which are at least told to be from Sumatra and belonging to the Sumatran subspecies. But this is as well here one reason for the ongoing research on the genetic basis to understand where do the elephants come from, and very often the origin which has been told is not the one where they really came from. So this often lies back in the past, and it needs to be confirmed genetically.
Perfect. Yeah, I hope that answers Mr. Saib's question. Perfect. We can move to the next question, or rather, there are comments about the discussion that we've been having earlier between Dr. Christian and Ms. Heidi. And there are a couple of comments which I would like to quickly take up and not taking a lot of time. So one of the points that come across as a conservation value that we were discussing about, Mr. Vadira says that once elephant gets into captivity, it loses its wild instinct of survival. And the second is the knowledge that is being passed on from one generation to another. In case of wild elephant, it's no more there in terms of captivity. So that could be one reason where getting them back into wild could be a real challenge. Another observation by Mr. Naito, where he or she puts that nature habitat of elephants in tropic area, it's like there is a growth and good welfare in Europe. But again, it goes back to the question, whether it should be released to zoo or should we take it forward as elephant conservation value. So these are the important points, and I would like also to share 2 points on the same. One is about the very interesting finding shared by Dr. Christian about the sleep behavior. And I would also like to say that this is also often observed by students when they are doing their research in captive elephants. They find this a distinct difference about captivity. Elephants sleeping, they are taking the sleeping position, and that is across the age group, not just the calf, juvenile elephants, even the adult elephants. So that could be interesting aspect which can be combined with anxiety, because in wild it would be anxiety prone, vis-a-vis in captivity the safety aspect is more, and that could be linked to the sleep behavior, and that could be well researched in captivity only, right? It's going to be always debatable whether what is the conservation value, but this is definitely could be one of the conservation value when we look at the research. Another, which also Dr. Christian has mentioned about the genetic basis, that would be really interesting because as Mr. Sayu talked about the Sumatran elephant, it would be interesting to see after these genetic evaluations. And also there, I would like to quote another example, which is very specific to India. So recently, there's one of the leading institutes in India, and along with the Indian Institute of Sciences, there are 2 academic institutes in India who are trying to do this genetic study, and they wanted to collect the dung, for the DNA analysis from the wild area. And this study was supposed to be done all the elephant present state, which is 24 states in India. And the data collection was very, very difficult, because there are multiple challenges. You need to get permission, you need to get a permission at a multiple level because it's a Schedule 1 species as per the Indian constitution, and there are several legal permissions are required, and then you have to go through the lot of bureaucracy and then get into the wild, and then you start tracking the wild elephants to collect the sample which is required. And again, the preservation of sample become another challenging situation. Vis-a-vis the same study is done simultaneously, where the same samples are collected from the captivity from all the states, where the sample is already been collected within a year, whereas the wild population sample collection is still going on for the last 2 years or so. So that is also another conservation value when we look at the captivity elephants, where it can become a really good laboratory experiment for various kind of researchers. That's something that I would like to add to it. So I would request Kushal to ask the question, because he requested to ask the question directly rather than typing it. So Kushal, would you like to ask the question? I'll just unmute you.
Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead, Kushal.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me in to speak, and I congratulate the speakers for presenting such a informative topic today with all the pictorial representation. Uh, the first question I would like to raise here is about the food offered to the zoo active animals regarding the number of species of plants given to them as forage. Is it similar to that of those found in the wild in Asian countries with respect to Asian elephants, or it's something that species which are specific to European continent? And I have another question with regarding to the food pads of the animals in captive condition. How is the food pad in the captive condition with even after the substrate being changed over to, I can see through the pictures that it is provided it more of sand particles and but in the nature in the wild it's not so similar. So has the pad health improved after the changeover? And the third point, last, I would just say that I have seen some of the wild elephants sleeping in forest with a very good forage covering, where they can make sure themselves they are not visible and they feel safe. So they perfectly lie on the ground in wild and take nap. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for this contribution. Let me go through your questions one by one. First, regarding the diet. This depends heavily on the location here in Europe. I mean, every location has a different amount of browse species to provide the elephants, and it depends also if there's a zoo located inside a city, then it's quite difficult to get a lot of different browse there, or if it's out on the countryside where they have a lot just out of the door. So if feasible, the elephants get a big variety of browse provided. And of course, the species of the trees are not the same as they would be in Asia. We have different flora here. So, but we know from, we have a long list of species which they can deal with and which they like. Not each the same, but we know we can provide them a big amount of different browse if it's available. And then second question regarding the feed. If I got it right, there was the question if we had some impact of the substrate on the foot health. And yes, of course we do. This comparative research on the foot health in the Asians here in Europe, they figured out that one of the risk factors is if we have a concrete flooring, so which means a hard flooring. So a soft substrate was a positive factor for foot health, especially. Definitely, we cannot say this in general. If you have an elephant with an abscess and is open or whatever, then you wish to keep this clean for some days, and then it might be easier to do this on a concrete flooring where you can wash it. But yes, we see in general, especially when focusing on the preventative foot care, we see a positive impact of soft substrates. And thank you so much for your input regarding the sleeping in the wild. It's exactly what we would expect, that if elephants feel safe in the wild, they will prefer to have lying rest compared to just drowse in a standing position. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kushi. And our next question, which is put together by our group, it has been very interesting journey that Dr. Christian has shared in his presentation. And I would say it's more of, for a time being, as you know, we had a wonderful discussion between Heidi and Dr. Christian about the conservation value of captive elephants. So I keep the debate aside, and I would look at it more positively. Per se, particular to India and Asian countries, now there are multiple challenges when it comes to conserving elephants. But if I just focus on, let's say, a human-elephant conflict as one of the challenges, and then also the habitat management, the conservation management, there is a huge role of elephants. The elephants being part of the very, very important operations, like there is a rhino which is injured and nobody can go to such area which is inaccessible, where the elephants can go in along with the veterinary doctors and other volunteers, access that area and try to save that rhino. vis-a-vis the elephants need to be radio collared so that we can track the movements, because the forest is very different in India vis-a-vis South Africa for that matter. So where we can't track them 24/7, 365 days, so we need to put them radio collars. And it's not a savanna where we can go on foot and dart the animal. So we again require help of elephants to go on their back. And these are the different elephants who have experience of participating in such operations, so they are trained accordingly. So now India is going through the changes, or for that matter, all Asian countries are going through these changes, these debates, that should the elephants be employed, should elephants be trained in such kind of operations, because then there is a value that elephants will always be in captivity. Earlier they were in circus, in zoo, now they'll be in a captivity and to participate in such kind of operations. So I just wanted to put this backdrop, but I'll not be taking this debate forward. What is that I want to ask Dr. Christian and Heidi? I would like both of you to contribute. I would like to understand, when it comes to European countries, how this transition happened. Dr. Christian has beautifully explained that transition. I would like to understand this transition with a certain milestones, because this could be very important for a country like India to adapt to these and expedite this transition. For example, Dr. Christian has explained the trigger why from old enclosure to savanna enclosure, a simulation of a savanna, why the transition happened. I would like to know who all contributed in this transition. Definitely veterinary doctor, definitely researcher, but who all has contributed in this transition? That is first question. Second, the number of years it would have taken, number of years, number of decades. We understood the triggers, why this has happened. We would like to know who all contributed, the numbers of decades it would have taken, the kind of challenges all these participants or all these stakeholders would have faced while facing this transition from old enclosure to savanna kind of enclosure, more from earlier welfare definitions to the current welfare definitions, which is more of anxiety-free, more of activity-enabled. So what are the challenges these stakeholders would have faced? And, as we know that Asian elephants and African elephants will not be surviving or thriving in European continents. So we know that European zoos are contributing in a certain way to the conservation. However, it's not a priority, because the habitat, the wilderness for Asian and African elephants are in Asia and Africa. So conservation value of wilderness, the wild elephants in Asia and Africa would be definitely more than in Europe. So when Europe, it is not a priority, how this has become a priority and how this beautiful transition has happened from old enclosure to savanna enclosure, where there is less of anxiety, more of activity-enabled welfare. So how this has become priority? So I would like to ask this question, summarize it so that you can take one by one, both of you, please. First would be the number of years it has taken to have this welfare transition in European zoos, especially if we talk about the ISA, the guidelines that Dr. Christian has talked about. So number of years and number of decades it has taken for the transition. Who are the stakeholders who contributed in this transition? That is second question. Third question, what all challenges these stakeholders would have faced to have this transition successfully? I could say that. And fourth is, if it was not a priority, how this beautiful transition has happened. So these are the four questions, and I would request both of you to take these one by one.
Okay, so I will start with the first one regarding the time and the decades. I think it's not easy to define a starting point and say it started in this year. I would say we can, define the beginning of the century, so let's say around 2000, where we started to rethink our management and care here in Europe. mainly due also to the breeding situation, where we said we cannot import further individuals from Africa or from Asia. We should do our best to get a self-sustainable breeding population here. And then they started one zoo after the other. So some, took longer to change their minds. Others were quicker. Then this depended. And now I would say it took around 5 years to put the best practice guidelines together from IASA. They have been published in 2020. And I think in 2030, probably, all the facilities will have gone to protected contact, which will be only one aspect of elephant management, but it might indicate a bit how many decades we expect for such changes. Heidi, I would give to you for the next question.
Okay, thanks. I would agree with what Dr. Schiffmann said about the fact that it's taken a while. However, I would go back even further. I know in the 1990s, there was already discussion, not just in North America, but also in Europe, about perhaps changing some of the management. And that has been kind of slow. I think on both continents, in both groups, both the American Zoo Association and IASA, both have kind of worked in a similar fashion, where some facilities were more quick to change, other facilities have taken longer to change. AZA also has come up with guidelines. I'm not sure what year they were, transitioning their management styles and things along those lines. In the US, we are regulated also by the US Department of Agriculture. So facilities that have non-native species, or facilities that have like laboratories with animals, things along those lines. And so working in conjunction with that government agency also to make changes to things like, how much space does a particular species need, and so on and so forth. So there've been a number of meetings over the years. I would point out that India, though, the Central Zoo Authority, maybe 10 years ago, did, under a lot of pressure from animal rights activists, did try to say that elephants don't belong in zoos in India, and wanted to take all elephants out of zoos. But then they quickly had to backtrack because they found that was absolutely not feasible. There were elephants that were not handled, and so they couldn't give them to the forest departments. The forest departments did not want them in the camps because the elephants were, not handled, and was going to be very difficult to integrate them into their programs. So I think that, one has to look at the region as well. What I was the questions I was asking Dr. Schiffmann earlier had more to do with zoo animals outside their native range, because yes, within Asia, for example, there's always going to be some captive elephants, because it is a conservation response to conflict across the range and across all 13 countries. Some do it more than others, but India certainly will capture problem animals. There are also orphan animals that wind up being taken into captivity, and that happens as well across the range. So I think that it's not so much trying to say, do elephants belong in captivities, but zoos outside the range, that's the biggest criticism I see that, a lot of these groups tend to push on. So that criticism, while sometimes it can be very frustrating, it's also sometimes helpful to drive change, right? It's when we are pressured, we as a community are pressured, that we feel that we have to respond. And like a lot of the research that is now going on that Dr. Schiffmann illustrated very well in his presentation has come up because of pressure from critics saying, well, they shouldn't be in zoos because this, this, and this. Okay, well, to address that, you have to be able to show and document and come up with some way of doing it in a manner that you can really say, no, actually, their quality of life has greatly improved. Their health has improved, the feet condition has improved, just anything like that. So it's, of course, that helps to drive, change. But sometimes it's also not helpful when you have non-stakeholders like politicians or things like that that try to push for legislation. We've had that in the US, where they don't know what they're talking about really, and they just want to kind of make a name for themselves. And so they want to push that, you know, all elephants, like the situation in India, all elephants should be out of zoos. That was kind of a mistake because it was better. The only positive that came out of that is that zoos with elephants were all assessed, and it was determined, okay, you have a good program, you have good facilities, you can keep your animals. Or if you improve your program and improve your facilities, you can keep your animals. So at the end of the day, in India, very few animals were moved out of zoos, but it was still a good exercise to go through. But it was kind of a bit of a little too ambitious. And obviously there was not a clear end goal, you know, that, okay, if we're going to do this, we have to do it progressively, which is what Europe and North America have done. We have to improve our welfare, our management, and be able to show that we've done that, and be able to show that now we have, Europe has self-sustaining populations now, both African and Asian. African, I think, almost self-sustaining, Asian as self-sustaining. So if that's your end goal, then you work towards it. But a lot of the change has to come from within, from the stakeholders, whether it's zoo management teams, and then of course, veterinarians, outside researchers, you know, things along those lines.
Absolutely right, absolutely right. And these are really good insights even with respect to India. And you rightly said that the positive has come out of that, where at least they started assessing whether they have those capabilities, those concepts within India, and that questioning has started within the forest department. We are working with one of the small population, elephant population state in India, where they are very keen and they are seeking our help how to put the elephant care facility, because as a mandate, they are not supposed to keep the elephants in zoo, and building the separate facility, because these elephants are with them for 20 years and they can't just abandon them, or they can't send them back into the wilderness. So they are seeking the help, and that's a change in the mindset because of the legal involvement. So absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Would you like to take next question?
Yes, I will. Just to say, I fully agree with Heidi about everybody needs to contribute. And this was your next question: who contributed to the change? And if you want to do such a change in the management, you need everybody involved. And for me, it always starts with the keepers. You know, if you have the elephant keepers which work with the elephants on a daily basis, and you wish to provide the elephants a better life, then you should talk with the keepers, make the plans. How should we improve? How should we improve the enclosure? How should we improve the diet? How should we improve whatever? And of course, you need the experts with the veterinarians, the nutritionists, and so on. And only as a team, in my view, you can do it into a better. You can bring it into a better, and probably quite quick if you all have the same direction and go for the same aim. But you need everybody involved. And of course, if you can do it together with researchers who can afterwards show that you made a change, that you were successful, or if the researchers show where you should still adapt, then it's a continuous way where you go, and a continuous way of improvement. And I think that's where we should focus on. It's not done now. It's a continuous way to improve and get better and make it better for the elephants.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, and in a way, you both have answered it partly, but I still like to bring it on the table. What about the challenges faced? Do you want to elaborate on that? And if it is not a priority, how it has become a priority, and what could be the situation? You know, definitely the animal welfare is one of the aspects which would have triggered. But I would like to understand from both of you, if it is not a priority, how it has become a priority over a period of time, from a conservation value point of view.
You mean to make the changes in the welfare changes?
Yes. For example, if let's say the success story that we all are aware about in America about the wolves, you know, that was a priority to get the get them back, to have that the value chain restored. Whereas African and Asian elephants cannot be restored in Europe or America for that matter. So how it has become a priority to improve their welfare? And what could be the challenges faced while doing that? Because it will be always under criticism that these would be, in the wilderness in Asia and Africa, why these need to be, taken priority in terms of conservation value.
Right, and if I could just address that really quickly, and then Dr. Schiffmann, please feel free to add. I think that there's a couple things. First of all, elephants as a species are a very high-profile, well-liked species, right, across the public realm. And so, of course, an elephant is going to have, a lot more of a status of being important to identify. Sorry, let me turn that off. So I think that's the number one thing that drives why elephants in effect. Then I think that the fact that the public is engaged means that you're going to get a certain amount of pressure to do things. And so then you always have different stakeholders that might, disagree, but at the same time, if you have those kinds of open public discussions, that is going to push change a little bit more. So whether it's reintroducing a species like the wolves, or how to improve the welfare of elephants in zoos, it's all kind of driven ultimately by public discourse. And I think in the case of elephants in zoos, that was not the only species that was really addressed. I think that as the public became more aware of wildlife in general, then they have an interest, and so then they start to look at zoos and they hear criticism of zoos, not just for elephants, for a variety of species, and then which ones are the ones that maybe could use change the most. I mean, you don't often hear people complaining about some of the small species that are managed in zoos, because one assumes that, oh, they're smaller and so they have a lot of their needs met, which may be true, may not be true. But an elephant is so prominent and so visible that it's an easy target then to say, oh, well, we've now seen documentaries of elephants, ranging very far in Asia or Africa. And so we realize now that when we go to a zoo and look at an elephant there, it doesn't have the space. So that's a very simple concept. And I think that that's kind of what starts to then drive the whole conversation. But as Dr. Schiffmann said, you have to kind of start, somewhere. And yeah, starting with the keepers. I mean, I especially like that because that's what, I started my career as an elephant keeper. And so I think that you just kind of, work your way around all the different, try to have different conversations and then see what direction it goes in and try to get support. So I think it's across the board. I don't think that elephants have been singled out. They seem to be to those of us that work with elephants, but I think that the same conversation has happened with other species as well. But it's just that elephants are very popular with the public, and so they tend to kind of get a little bit higher priority.
Thank
you. Yes, again, fully agree. So not much to add to what Heidi said. Elephants are fascinating and they are perceived as individuals. So imagine here at the zoo, it might happen that there's a visitor who knows the elephant when he was back a child. So he knows this individual and he will visit the zoo once a year or whatever, and he meets the same elephant 20 years later with his own child, probably, And this makes a difference. It's not like a zebra or like a giraffe. It's an individual, and I think the public perceives the elephants quite often as individuals, and this really means that the public has a big interest if the elephants are doing fine. They want to know if the elephants are doing fine. They want to know if they are cared for in a perfect way or not. So that might be the reason why the pressure from the public can be significant in this species. And of course, then, we need to think about, do we a good job when caring for them or not? And if not, obviously, we should think about changes. Just regarding your other question of the challenges, of course, if you do changes, there are always challenges. In my view, apart from all the stuff with the financial requirements which are needed for such big species, the biggest challenges might be the one inside our heads. So sometimes you are talking to keepers and you get aware of, if they're open-minded, it's far easier to convince them to change. But if they are not open-minded, that might be the biggest challenge for you, to change the minds of their people into a better for the elephants.
That's very well said, I must say. Challenge, it always, change and mindset, that goes hand in hand. Nobody liked change, and then there is a way of dealing with the change, very rightly you said. And I think that may come to the closure, because there are no any other questions. And let me say it has been really wonderful. And I would like to mention that we have been doing these events from 2014, and we have a certain, we call them at times members, we call them at times volunteers, but there are a certain set of people who keep coming back. So earlier, pre-COVID, we used to have this offline event, very restricted to the people from Bangalore city, which is in one of the states in southern India. And we used to have this set of people who are very, very focused, and they would come with their family, their friends. They used to invite them, and they used to come in every last Sunday of every month. Post-COVID, the situation had changed, and we also taken it more positively. And now it is open to the all kind of audiences, and as well as we are started getting more and more participation even from the global speakers such as you. And I would like to mention that many of our members and volunteers see these videos on YouTube. And I'm more than sure that anybody who is not able to log in today, they will have a real treat when they'll go through this video and the presentation that Dr. Christian has shared, and the inputs that Heidi has shared, with her a long experience and a varied experience across the different countries and the continents. So I would really close the Q&A session, thanking both of you. And I really had a really good time, and it was such an insightful presentation and a discussion for myself. Can I request Aishwarya to take it forward?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for handling the Q&A session. To conclude today's event, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude on behalf of Friends of Elephant event to Dr. Christian Schiffmann and Ms. Heidi Riddle. Thank you, Dr. Schiffmann and Ms. Riddle, for your time and wonderful insights on this webinar. And I would also like to make a small announcement that this webinar will be available on YouTube soon. And thank you all of you for joining us this evening and for asking interesting questions. And see you all at the next event, and wishing you all a good day. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.